going to throw the ball out to the corner. It's covered up, so he decides to flip it off the glass.
Road court advantage remains in full effect in this series. 6-0 the road teams are for the first time in NBA playoff history. Kawhi Leonard with 29 of his 45 in the second half as the Clippers pulled away and forced a Game 7 on their home court. I don't know if that's a good thing. Traditionally it is. Maybe not in this series. Who knows? Welcome in. It's Playoff Central live here with the Clippers winning Game 6. The Hall of Famer Isaiah Thomas, Quentin Richardson right over there. I'm Matt Weiner. Clippers needed a win on the road. They get another win on the road and force a Game 7 and, really dominated the fourth quarter.
Totally dominated the fourth quarter, and we saw Kawhi Leonard. I mean, the three of us were sitting here just like, going crazy like some nights when we've seen Dame Lillard do his thing, or Steph or Kyrie. And these are the type of performances that you want and dream about in the playoffs. And Kawhi just had one of those magical nights tonight where he couldn't be stopped. He was doing everything, dribbling, shooting, defending. I mean, he was the best player out on the floor. We've been talking about Luka being the best player in the series, but tonight, Kawhi left no doubt who was the best player in this game tonight.
No question he was the best player on the floor tonight. And Q, he kind of answered the call that a lot of folks have had for him in this series to be a takeover guy.
Absolutely. I mean, tonight I think, he was a guy that was a big Kobe fan. I think he showed every bit of what the Mamba mentality was about. And Kobe's looking down on him as proud as ever right now because he was – I've never seen Kawhi play like this. Literally, me and Zeke was talking about it as it was happening. I had never seen him, really going into his bag, handling the ball, doing step-back moves, and really taking it like, I'm taking these shots.
You said he was reaching deep in his bag like
Hey,
what?
Like Mark Jones said, he was deep in his bag like the fries at the bottom. That was, hey, look, he was feeling it, and I love seeing it. I love to see him take over like that in that fashion and really, carry his team to a Game 7. That was big time.
Not only 45 points, but 45 points on just 25 shots. He was 5 of 9 from three-point range as well. And, it was striking to me, and you mentioned it too, Q, as we were watching the game. He would get a screen, perhaps, with Doncic in front of him and didn't want it. He wanted Doncic in front of him, and maybe that's partly because of the matchup. Maybe that's because it's Luka Doncic in front of them and he wanted to make a point.
I think it's something that T. Lue probably told him. Like, listen, he's wearing everybody out and getting the switch he wants. We need to start taking advantage of him. He's not the greatest defensive player, and he doesn't want to guard you guys. So let's put him in those same type situations and get him on a Paul George, on a Kawhi, who they feel has an offensive advantage, and let's see how he does.
Yeah, and when an offensive player gets it going, and you're a great offensive player too, and he starts going at you back, right? Your mindset has to shift. Now you become a defender all the time, and that takes away from your offense. And I think by Kawhi going at Luka tonight the way he did, it put Luka on the defensive side where he couldn't be as good and as aggressive offensively with the ball because he had to think, we always talk about two-way players, Q, right? And what's the mindset? You got to go from defense to offense. But when you just all offense, that's a hell of a luxury to have during the course of the game. And I thought they made Luka become a two-way player tonight, which kind of threw him off a little bit.
Absolutely. I think this was the best way to go at him because he's been unstoppable. And I think, like you said, forcing him to change those gears and think in the other direction, it's more natural for PG. It's more natural for Kawhi. They are those are the type of players they are. For Luka, he's an offensive juggernaut. So to have him put on that hat and play after play after play, be pressed to play defense, I think that's why you saw him not driving as much down the stretch because it's tough. When you guard, that takes a lot of energy. You can't guard hard on the other end and then come down here and then be able to handle the ball and create and do everything that he does. So I think that made it a lot more difficult for him to be offensively all the way into his game, and he had to play defense on those guys the way he was asked.
And this wasn't one of Doncic's better offensive games, maybe his worst of this series. He got a couple of late, kind of basically garbage time buckets, for Dallas and finished 11 of 24 from the field and just 2 of 9 from three-point range. They blitzed him a little bit early in the game and then, as usual, threw a bunch of different defenders at it. How much of those shooting numbers I just mentioned had to do with what LA was up to?
I think it had a lot to do with it. We like to say in basketball, we use a terminology, you got to put them on their heels, right? Well, that comes from boxing. We borrowed that from boxing because, and when you were little and you were learning how to fight, they always taught you can't fight going back.
Right.
You can't punch going backwards. So you always try to, push forward. And I thought they had Luka on his heels tonight going backwards and thinking about defense as opposed to thinking about offense. And that showed in the numbers tonight.
Flip side to that, Reggie Jackson spent a lot of time guarding Doncic and then punishing him or whoever was guarding him on the other end, including 14 in the first quarter. He wound up with 25 on the night on just 15 shots. That's a huge bonus offense for LA.
No, Reggie was awesome tonight, especially in that first quarter. He had like 12, 14 points, and he really was the main driving force of keeping them in a competitive situation. But I wanted to take the time out to give a salute to T. Lue, because I feel like he did a great job coaching this game. He made some little adjustments here. Luke Kennard hadn't played much the whole series. He threw him out there and he played. He made some plays down the stretch, and he was a positive and not a negative. And I think the way that we're talking about that they attacked Luka and the way they went at him, I think that was a direct coaching thing because it hadn't happened most of the series. And I think that was something that T. Lue kind of took. And I think that's from being a player. You know what I'm saying? From being a player, T. Lue knows that. He knows how offensive guys are when you're in that locker room. And T. Lue was one of those guys who was the other guy that probably had to defend the better players while his offensive guy didn't have to do that. So he, from being a player, I think you get those little tidbits and you can take those into battle. And I think it worked out for T. Lue tonight.
All right, speaking of Doncic, he's made his way to the microphone.